I never thought I'd be posting here. Hell, I never thought my life would turn into something straight out of a bad soap opera. But here we are. I'm John Reeves, 57M, and I own a chain of restaurants on the East Coast, Boston, specifically. I built it from the ground up, one burned omelet and one missed rent payment at a time. Started as a dishwasher at 16. Worked my way up under a head chef who had the temperament of a rabid dog but the skills of a culinary god. R.I.P. Tony, you magnificent bastard. By 28, I had scraped together enough to open my own place. A tiny hole-in-the-wall Italian joint with 8 tables and a menu so basic it was almost embarrassing. But people loved it. Fast forward 30 years, and I now own 15 restaurants, a massive catering business, and a solid retirement fund. Life was good. Until it wasn't. 6 months ago, my wife Sarah, the love of my life, my rock, died of cancer. 3 months from diagnosis to gone. Just like that. She didn't have kids of her own, but she basically raised her sisters 3 after a nasty divorce left them struggling. She loved them like they were hers. And now? Now my house felt too big, too empty. I have 2 kids from my first marriage, Nick, 31M, and Emily, 28F. Their mom and I split ages ago. No bad blood, just life. Emily is sharp as hell, works in banking, takes zero bullshit. Nick? Good guy. A little too trusting, but he's got a good heart. He works in pharmaceutical sales, makes decent money, $115,000 a year. And 2 years ago, he got married to Kelly, 30F. Now, Kelly had 2 kids from a previous marriage, Sophie, 8F, and Jason, 10M. Their dad died in a car accident when they were little. At first, she seemed great, always going on about how much she loved having a real family again. The kids, sweet as can be, started calling me Grandpa from day one. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. The first one? She quit her job as a real estate agent right after marrying Nick. Said she needed to focus on blending the family. Weird, but okay. Then she started getting really interested in my business. Not in a, hey, tell me about your passion way. More like a, how much is this place worth way. She asked about contracts, insurance policies, real estate holdings. Always steered conversations toward money, private school tuition, the cost of college, how hard it is to save for retirement when you're a single mom. And the thing that really should have tipped me off? The inheritance comments. When we take over the business, once we have access to the family money, it's important to secure all the grandkids' futures equally. At the time, I shrugged it off. Thought she just wanted to be part of the family. Big mistake. The real crazy started around the holidays. Every year, I host a big Christmas Eve dinner. I cook everything myself. Always have, always will. This time, Kelly showed up with binders. Right in the middle of dinner, while I was serving duck confit I'd spent 3 damn days preparing. She whips out these color-coded business plans. John, I've been doing some research, she announced. Like we were in a boardroom meeting and not a family gathering. Millennials love avocado toast, so we should rebrand and start franchising. Emily, who had been side-eyeing her all night, put down her fork. Kelly, you don't have any restaurant experience. Why would you be involved in this? Kelly snapped. Right there, in the middle of Christmas dinner, she starts tearing up about how I'm excluding her from the family legacy, how I don't care about her kids, how she just wants to secure their future. Nick tried to smooth things over, but Emily wasn't having it. That's not how this works, Kelly, she said flatly. This isn't a family heirloom. Dad built this from scratch. Dinner ended awkwardly. But Kelly? She wasn't done. A week later, she started showing up unannounced at my house. Always with an excuse, dropping off cookies, store-bought, price tag still on, just in the neighborhood. Wanted to show me pictures of the kids. But every time, she took photos. Of my house, my office, my mail. Then, my head chef called. Boss, your daughter-in-law just tried to get our secret recipes. Excuse me? I called Kelly immediately. She played dumb, but that was it for me. I installed security cameras. And thank God I did. Because 2 weeks later, I caught her breaking into my home office. I was testing a new dish for the spring menu, pork tenderloin with rosemary honey glaze. The house smelled amazing. I was just about a plate when I got a motion alert on my phone. Office camera. I pulled up the feed, and there she was. Kelly, rifling through my filing cabinets. My stomach dropped. She wasn't even being careful. She had a pin scanner, flipping through contracts, property deeds, financial statements, scanning everything. I took a screenshot, then another. Then I called Emily. Dad, do not confront her yet. Let's find out what she's after. We waited. When she came downstairs, she was all smiles. Told me she'd gotten lost, looking for the bathroom. Meanwhile, my phone was blowing up with security alerts. She had tried to open my locked desk drawer. Emily did some digging. That's when we found the first real bombshell. Kelly had been trying to open trust accounts for her kids, using forged documents with my signature. I saw red. The next day, I confronted Nick. I need to talk to you about Kelly. He immediately got defensive. Dad, she's just trying to look out for her kids. Nick, she forged my goddamn signature. That shut him up. I showed him the security footage, the fake documents, the weird Facebook rants about toxic rich families and inheritance discrimination. His face went pale. Then, almost like he already knew, he whispered. She's been talking about moving back home, said if I don't back her up, she'll take the kids and go. Jesus Christ. She was using the kids as leverage. Nick stormed out. 2 days later, Kelly snapped. She showed up at my house at 9 p.m., banging on my door like a lunatic. When I opened it, she shoved past me, red-faced, shaking, screaming. This isn't fair. You're ruining my family. I tried to calm her down. Kelly, I set up trust funds for your kids, $50K each for college. That's more than fair. Her eyes flashed, and then she dropped the bombshell. I'm pregnant, and if you don't change your will, you'll never see your grandchild. Ever. She was dead serious. And in that moment, I finally saw her for who she really was. A manipulative, greedy, scheming liar. I took a deep breath. Get the hell out of my house. She smirked, pulled out her phone. I recorded everything, John. If you don't agree, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. Oh, she just fucked up. Because now, it was war. Nick showed up at my house the next morning, looking like hell. His hair was a mess, like he'd been running his hands through it all night, and he had that glassy, sleep-deprived look people get when their entire world has just caved in. I didn't say anything at first, just handed him a cup of coffee and waited. He took a sip, winced. Jesus, Dad, do you drink this stuff, or use it to clean engine parts? Puts hair on your chest, I muttered. Nick let out a short, humorless laugh. Then he set the mug down and stared at the table. She told me she was pregnant last night. Said you threw her out like trash? I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice even. She came to my house screaming like a banshee, threatened to keep my grandkid from me if I didn't hand over my business, and then tried to blackmail me with a fake recording. I paused. So yeah, I threw her out. Nick nodded slowly, rubbing his temples. He looked exhausted, defeated. I don't know what to do, he admitted. You know exactly what to do. You're just not ready to say it out loud. His jaw clenched. I saw the flicker of realization in his eyes, the moment he finally started to accept that his wife wasn't who he thought she was. I need proof, he muttered. Something concrete. Something I can't explain away. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the security footage, and set it in front of him. Start with this. Nick watched in silence as Kelly appeared on the screen, rifling through my filing cabinets, scanning documents, trying to break into my locked desk. His fingers tightened around the phone. Then I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. And this? I said. This is what Emily found. Nick frowned and flipped it open. At first, his eyes just skimmed the pages, his expression blank. Then he started actually reading, and his face went pale. What the fuck is this? His voice was barely above a whisper. It's Kelly's journal. He looked at me sharply. She keeps a journal? Apparently. And she's been documenting everything. Her plans. Her manipulations. Even the pregnancy. She knew about it weeks before she told you. She was waiting for the right moment to use it as leverage. Nick blinked rapidly, shaking his head like he could physically reject the words. He turned the page. Then another. His breathing got shallower. And then he hit the worst part. The breakdown of Sarah's death. My late wife. His stepmother. Kelly had analyzed it. How it left me vulnerable. How it created a power vacuum in the family. She literally wrote, "This is my opportunity to secure long-term financial stability." Nick shoved the journal away like it burned him. I can't. He pushed his chair back and stood up abruptly, pacing the kitchen. I stayed quiet. Just let him process. Finally, he stopped, hands on his hips, staring at the floor. She never loved me. I didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say. Nick let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. She never fucking loved me. I was just convenient. His voice broke on the last word. I stood up and clapped a hand on his shoulder. She fooled a lot of people, kid, but she's not gonna fool you anymore. Nick took a shaky breath, then nodded. We're going to take her down. The next few days were too quiet. Kelly stopped showing up unannounced, stopped calling, even stopped posting her usual passive-aggressive social media rants. I didn't trust it. And then, the other shoe dropped. Emily called me first. Dad, check your email. Now. I opened my laptop and saw it immediately. A legal notice. Kelly was suing me, claiming unlawful disinheritance, financial coercion, and emotional distress. Emily snorted through the phone. She really went with financial coercion. Bold move for someone who literally forged your signature on bank documents. What else? I asked, already knowing there had to be more. Emily hesitated. She also wants access to the restaurant's financial records. Says she has a right to them as Nick's wife. I laughed. Actually laughed. Out loud. She thinks she can take my business. Oh, she doesn't think, Dad. She knows. Because she's delusional. I rubbed my temples. Brian already filed the restraining order, but now we're going to need a countersuit. Fraud, defamation, harassment, the whole 9 yards. I'll call him now, Emily said. And Dad? Let's bury her. Oh, we will. Step 1. Lock everything down. By the end of the day, Kelly was officially locked out of everything. No access to my properties. No access to my finances. She couldn't even step foot in one of my restaurants without violating the restraining order. Step 2. Control the narrative. We put out one carefully worded statement. No drama. No exaggeration. Just the facts. The $50,000 trust funds I set up for her kids. The forged financial documents. The journal detailing her manipulations. The restraining order. And then, the internet did the rest. People started digging. Someone found court records from her late husband's family. Turns out, she pulled the same shit with them. Threatened to withhold the kids unless they gave her more money. Filed a bogus lawsuit against their estate. Cut off all contact when they refused. And then, the real bombshell dropped. Someone, probably one of Kelly's old enemies, dug up an old phone call recording. It was her. Bragging. All you have to do is play the supportive wife. Make them think you love their dreams. Then, when the time is right, you take what's yours. It went viral. And just like that, Kelly became a joke. People started calling her the Black Widow Gold Digger. Memes flooded the internet. Her real estate license? Revoked. Her lawyer? Dropped her within 24 hours. And then, she snapped. I was at my downtown restaurant when it happened. Peak dinner rush. Packed house. And then, suddenly, screaming. I turned and saw her. Kelly. Drunk. 5 months pregnant. Fucking furious. She shoved past the hostess, knocking over a tray of silverware. John, she shrieked. You ruined my life. The whole restaurant went dead silent. Tom, my manager, rushed over. Boss, we got a problem. I sighed, wiped my hands on a towel, and stepped out from the kitchen. Kelly, you need to leave. She whirled on me, eyes wild. I'll destroy you, she screamed. And then, she said the one thing she never should have said. Loud. Public. In front of 200 witnesses. I swear to God, I'll abort this baby if you don't give me what I deserve. The whole restaurant froze. Nick, who had just arrived, went pale. And in that moment, Kelly finally lost everything. Nick stood there in the doorway, completely still. His face was blank, too blank. like his brain hadn't caught up with what his ears had just heard. The restaurant was silent. Every single person, every diner, every waiter, every bartender had just witnessed Kelly scream that she would abort her baby if she didn't get what she wanted. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. I just stared at her. She must have realized, a second too late, what she had just done. Her face twisted, a flicker of panic in her eyes. Then she doubled down. "Do you hear me, John?" Her voice was shrill, cracking. "You don't get to treat me like this. I am carrying your grandchild, and I swear to God." Nick snapped. "Shut up." His voice was louder than hers, sharper. It cut through the air like a whip. Kelly flinched. Nick marched toward her, fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. "You're disgusting," he hissed. "You are the most vile, manipulative, soulless person I have ever met." Kelly opened her mouth, but Nick wasn't done. "You were never going to be a good mother. You were never even planning to be. You don't see people. You see pawns. That's all I ever was to you, wasn't I? A goddamn pawn." Her expression flickered again. Anger, then guilt, then something else. But she didn't deny it. And that was all Nick needed to see. His shoulders slumped, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "You will never use this baby against me again. You will never manipulate me again. You will never touch my life again." Kelly laughed. Not a real laugh, a bitter, shaky, hysterical sound. "You think you're in control," she sneered. "You think you can just cut me out?" Nick stepped closer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Watch me." And then he pulled out his phone. Kelly blinked. "What?" "I just recorded everything you said," he cut in. "And so did at least half the people in this restaurant." For the first time since she had stormed in, Kelly looked scared. Her mouth opened, closed. She looked around, eyes darting to the people still recording. Then, in a last, desperate move, she lunged for Nick's phone. And that's when Tom, my 6 feet 3 inches, 250-pound restaurant manager, grabbed her. "That's enough," he said firmly. Kelly screamed, thrashing in his grip. Glass shattered as she knocked over a wine rack. Red liquid spilled everywhere. More screaming. The cops arrived within minutes. Nick and I stood outside while they put Kelly in the back of a squad car. He was shaking, hands on his knees, breathing hard. I can't believe she actually said that," he whispered. "She showed you exactly who she is." He nodded numbly. I put a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" Nick let out a weak, broken laugh. "No." Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then Nick straightened, took a deep breath, and pulled out his phone. "I'm filing for full custody." The next morning, Kelly was released on bail. Nick bailed her out. Against my advice. "She's still carrying my kid, Dad," he muttered. "I don't want her sitting in jail pregnant." I didn't agree, but I didn't argue. He had one thing left tying him to her, and until that baby was born, he couldn't fully walk away. But that didn't mean we weren't going after her. The very next day, my lawyer, Brian, filed everything. Emergency custody request, citing Kelly's public threats against the baby. Defamation lawsuit, for the lies she spread online. Fraud charges, for the forged financial documents. Harassment charges, for the months of manipulation. Nick and I sat in his lawyer's office, watching as the paperwork stacked up. "I should have done this sooner," he muttered. "You're doing it now," I said. Nick exhaled, nodded. "Let's finish this." It didn't take long. When the court saw the footage of Kelly screaming about using her pregnancy as a bargaining chip, they granted Nick full emergency custody the second the baby was born. And Kelly? Supervised visits only. No decision-making power over the child. Court-mandated psychiatric evaluation. Nick was stunned. He had expected a long, drawn-out battle, but the evidence was overwhelming. Kelly lost everything. And then? The DA took an interest in her past. Turns out, Kelly had more skeletons in her closet than we thought. Emily found old insurance records from her first husband's death. The police had ruled it a brake failure. But the insurance investigator? He had doubts. The payout? Nearly $1 million. And then there was the private investigator her late husband's family had hired. His report, never officially used, noted inconsistencies in Kelly's statements. Her timeline didn't match up, and there were questions about who had last serviced the car. The DA opened an inquiry. Kelly had tried to scam one too many families, and now she was finally paying for it. The day of the final custody hearing, Nick won. Kelly didn't even show up. Her lawyer had quit the case. She knew she had lost. The last time I saw her, she was sitting on a courtroom bench, staring at the floor. She didn't look at me, didn't look at Nick. She just sat there, a ghost of the woman she used to be. The judge granted Nick full parental rights, and just like that, Kelly was gone. A few weeks later, Nick came over with the baby. Ethan, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. My grandson. Nick looked nervous when he handed him over. I know how much this whole thing sucked, but I want him to have a real family. A good one. I took one look at that tiny, sleeping kid, wrapped up like a burrito, and I was done for. Come here, little man, I murmured, carefully cradling him. He was warm, soft. His tiny fingers twitched. Nick rubbed the back of his neck. I named him Ethan. I blinked. Sarah's favorite name. He nodded. She always said if she had a son, that's what she'd name him. Figured it was the right thing to do. For the first time in months, my chest felt lighter. Nick sat down across from me, watching as Ethan yawned in my arms. Do you think she'll ever try to come back? He asked quietly. I sighed. Women like Kelly? They don't disappear forever. I looked down at Ethan. But she'll never touch this kid. Not while we're around. Nick nodded, and for the first time in a long time, we were finally free. Nick settled into fatherhood faster than I expected. At first, he was stiff, unsure, like he thought he needed permission to be a good dad. I'd catch him hovering over the crib, watching Ethan sleep, like he was afraid the kid would disappear if he looked away. You're allowed to breathe, you know, I told him one night when he crashed at my place after a long day. He chuckled, rubbing his face. I know. It's just, every time I look at him, I think about how close I came to losing him. If I'd stayed with her, if she'd won in court. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't have to. You didn't lose him, and you won't. Nick exhaled and nodded, and little by little, he started to believe it. Kelly, meanwhile, was imploding. She had no money, no job, no access to Nick or Ethan. Her parents had taken in Sophie and Jason, not by her choice, but because she had no other options. And from what I heard, even they were done with her bullshit. She called Nick a few times, left voicemails. Nick, please, we can fix this. I miss you. I miss our family. He never answered. And then, the messages changed. You think you can take everything from me? Watch me, Nick. I'll make you regret this. Still, he didn't respond. And that's when she went nuclear. It was a Thursday night. I was closing up my restaurant when my phone buzzed with a notification. Bank alert. I frowned and opened the app. Then I saw it. Someone had tried to open a trust fund in Ethan's name. Not just any trust fund, one listing Kelly as the primary beneficiary. I felt my blood pressure spike. I immediately called Emily. Check your fraud alerts. Now. Less than 5 minutes later, she called me back, voice tight. Holy shit, Dad. She tried this at multiple banks, different states, different accounts. Nick, who had been staying late at his office, showed up at my house an hour later. He looked exhausted. She won't stop, he muttered. She's desperate, I said. So what do we do? Emily leaned against the counter, arms crossed. We stop playing defense. We take her down for good. Nick swallowed. How? She smirked. We let her bury herself. That weekend, we had a family dinner. Not the big ones we used to have, but just the 3 of us. Me, Nick, and Emily, plus baby Ethan, sleeping in a bassinet beside the table. Emily pulled out her laptop. So, you remember how we found out she was trying to open fraudulent accounts? Nick nodded, jaw tight. Well, Emily continued, I had a contact in banking run a deeper check. Turns out, she tried to use a notary stamp. I frowned. So? Emily grinned. So, she's not a notary anymore. Her license was revoked, meaning every document she notarized? Illegal, meaning we have her on bank fraud. Nick blinked. Jesus. But wait, there's more. Emily clicked another file. I also found some interesting emails between her and a legal consultant. I leaned forward. What kind of consultant? Emily raised an eyebrow. The kind who specializes in inheritance disputes. She paid him $3,000 to find loopholes in your will, Dad. She was trying to figure out a way to contest it before she even got pregnant. Nick's hands curled into fists. So she was planning to use the baby all along? Emily nodded. And now, she has nothing left, which makes her dangerous. Nick was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, he looked up at me. We pressed charges. The next morning, my lawyer filed everything. Fraud charges, for the forged bank documents. Identity theft, for attempting to use my signature again. Illegal notarization, since she tried to use a revoked license. And then, we called the DA. Because there was one last piece of the puzzle. A few weeks back, when Emily first started digging into Kelly's past, she found an old private investigator's report. The one Kelly's late husband's family had ordered after his car accident. The one that suggested his brakes had been tampered with. At the time, it wasn't enough to press charges. But now? Now that Kelly had a documented history of fraud, manipulation, and financial crimes, the DA was very interested in reopening the case. And just like that, Kelly had bigger problems than us. The night before her arraignment hearing, Nick and I sat on my back porch, drinking beers. He stared at the horizon, lost in thought. I keep wondering, what if she never got caught? What if I never saw it? Would I still be in that house, thinking she loved me? I took a slow sip of my beer. You'd still be there. But it wouldn't be love. It would be control. He sighed. I don't think I'll ever trust anyone again. You will, I said. Nick gave me a look. You sound pretty confident about that. I shrugged. Because I know you. And you're not her. He was quiet for a moment. Then he exhaled, shaking his head. God, I was so fucking blind. No, I said. You were just hopeful. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nick ran a hand through his hair. What if she comes back? I set my beer down and looked at him. She won't. And for the first time, I actually believed it. The next morning, Kelly showed up to court looking wrecked. She wasn't wearing designer clothes anymore, just a plain, wrinkled blazer. Her hair was unwashed. She looked small. And when the judge read out her charges, I saw it. The moment she realized it was over, she started crying. Real tears, this time. But nobody cared. Nobody believed her anymore. The judge ordered her immediate detainment. Nick and I walked out of that courtroom without looking back. For the first time in years, she had no power over us. The last time I saw Kelly, she was sitting in a courtroom, staring straight ahead, hands folded in her lap like a scolded child. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but diminished. Like she finally realized that no amount of manipulation, no amount of crocodile tears, was going to get her out of this. The judge listed the charges: fraud, identity theft, illegal notarization, attempted financial coercion. One after another, each hitting like a hammer. Nick sat beside me, silent. His hands were clasped together so tightly his knuckles had turned white, but his face? Calm. And then, the final blow. Due to the severity and repeated nature of the fraudulent activities, the court finds the defendant guilty. Ms. Reynolds, you are hereby sentenced to 18 months in state prison, with the first 90 days served immediately. After your release, you will be under 5 years of probation and required to attend mandatory psychiatric treatment. There was a sharp inhale from Kelly. And then? Nothing. No screaming. No theatrics. No last-minute outburst. Just silence. Because she knew. This time, she really lost. We walked out of the courthouse, blinking into the afternoon sun. Nick exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. It's done. His voice was quiet. Emily smirked. It was done the second she tried to bribe a banker with a fake notary stamp. I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. She's out of our lives. Nick nodded, but I could see the doubt lingering behind his eyes. I clapped a hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing, kid. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then, finally, yeah, I did. A month passed. Then 2. Nick and I settled into a new kind of normal. Ethan was growing like a weed. all chubby cheeks and tiny fists. The kid smiled all the time. Nick was a damn good dad. I could see it in the way he watched over Ethan, the way he softened every time he held him. One night, he came over for dinner. Just the two of us. He put Ethan down for a nap in the guest room, then joined me on the porch, a beer in hand. "You ever think about what she's doing right now?" he asked. I shrugged. Sitting in a jail cell, probably still trying to figure out how to con her way out of this. Nick huffed a laugh. "Sounds about right." We sat in silence for a while. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "I'm never getting married again." I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah." He exhaled. "I mean, think about it. I was a perfect target. A lonely guy who just wanted a family. And she played me like a goddamn fiddle." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on my knees. "You were a good person who trusted the wrong person. That's not a flaw, Nick. That's just life." He didn't respond right away, just stared at the horizon, lost in thought. "I ignored so many red flags," he muttered. "You're not the first guy to do that. And you won't be the last." He let out a dry laugh. "You're not going to give me some speech about how love is worth the risk?" "Nope." I took a sip of my beer. "I figure you'll get there on your own." Nick was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head, smiling a little. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Let me figure things out instead of forcing advice on me." I smirked. "Learned a long time ago that people don't listen unless they're ready." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just want Ethan to grow up in a normal family. And he will." Nick looked at me. "Yeah?" "Yeah," I said, nodding toward the baby monitor sitting on the porch table. "Because that kid's got a dad who gives a damn. And that's more than a lot of kids get." Nick swallowed hard, looking away. For the first time, I saw it. The weight lifting off his shoulders. Kelly's sentencing made the local papers. Woman convicted of multiple fraud charges after attempting to manipulate wealthy family. It was a short article. No mention of our names, just the facts. She sent Nick a letter from prison. He didn't open it, just threw it in the fireplace and watched it burn. "She doesn't get to take up space in my head anymore," he said simply. And that was the end of it. A year passed, then another. Nick thrived. He got a promotion, bought a new house, raised Ethan into a happy, loud, unstoppable little force of nature. One day, I was at his place for dinner when Ethan, now almost 3, ran up to me, arms outstretched. "Up, Grandpa." I scooped him up, chuckling as he grabbed fistfuls of my shirt. "You getting bigger, kid? Or am I just getting old?" "You old," he declared confidently. Nick laughed from the kitchen. "He's not wrong." I pretended to scowl. "Traitor." Ethan just giggled, nestling into my shoulder. And right then, I knew. Everything that happened. The lies, the manipulation, the court battles, the stress. It was all worth it. Because at the end of the day, we won. Not in the way Kelly always thought about winning. Money, power, control. No, we won because we had each other. And nothing, not Kelly, not the past, not anything, was ever going to take that away.